Chapter 461, The Power of Escape. So this is the story of the Ice Witch Lysandra? Noah felt oddly moved as he watched the memory for the first time. He couldn't decide whether Lysandra was villain or victim. Her deeds were monstrous in consequence, but her motives had been twisted and naive. She had made a bargain with the Void for the sake of Freljord's humans and her two sisters, then, despite her sisters' warnings, trusted the Void and released the Void Watcher. The result was catastrophic. She lost her sisters and became bound forever to seal that thing away. Seeing the memory play out, Noah thought Lysandra's choices were understandable up until she and her sisters sought Ornn's help to bind back the Void. Making a bargain with the Void didn't automatically make her irredeemable. What condemned her was that naive faith in the Void's goodness. But she had been a girl then, not the ancient Ice Witch who had stood guard over a seal for 10,000 years. Her eternal vigil over the howling abyss was both punishment and penance, an attempt to atone for lives ruined by her actions. Noah believed Lysandra's sisters might not be dead, merely trapped in true ice. True ice never melts. It's condensed with powerful magic. Weapons made from it are legendary. Ash's icy bow, Sewanni's flail, Brahm's shield are all examples. There are three sources for true ice in the Freljord: the magical ice produced by the Yeti people, now nearly extinct, with only Willump remaining, Lysandra's own artificial true ice fashioned from her terrible sorcery, and the rumored true ice of a demigod, Anivia. The last is almost purely legend. No one in the Freljord has ever seen it. To create enough true ice to seal the Void Watcher, Lysandra didn't only pour her own power into the task. She siphoned the iceborn blood and magic from her two sisters and drew on the magic suffusing the surrounding land, stealing from yetis, trolls, and other dangerous creatures. That theft gave her the raw power to forge the seal, but it also meant the Watcher, her sisters, and many beasts were trapped together under the ice. Noah had another reason to hope the sisters might still live. Not everything had stayed sealed. Something had already slipped out of the true ice long ago. Not a Watcher, but a Yordle. Nar, the missing link. Ancient, said to be 9,000 years or more, Nar was a peculiar sort of Yordle who treated fighting like play. When the Void fell and the Watcher began slaughtering Freljord's people, Nar dashed in, slammed the Watcher with a huge stone, and was frozen in the instant Lysandra's ice swept everything into stasis. Nar stayed trapped for millennia until the glacier finally loosened and he was unsealed. That escape made Noah think it was possible Lysandra's sisters had been frozen, not killed. The Yetis, by contrast, had paid the worst price. To fashion such a massive amount of true ice, Lysandra emptied their power. The Yeti magic was drained almost to nothing in an instant, and most of them died. Willump survived only because he wasn't there when the drain occurred. In a way, the Yeti race itself was another bleak consequence of Lysandra's choices. Noah didn't dwell on judging Lysandra too harshly. This temporal fragment was not his life, and the woman in it had acted under desperation and betrayal. Still, one practical thought nagged him. Would his own summoning of an Ice Witch hero template affect the Lysandra from the memory? He snapped back to reality. What happened? He startled at the shift. The environment felt foreign at first, but then he realized he was still on the moon. A massive, tens of meters tall iceberg towered before him. He stood at the center of its base. The ice around him refracted light into a crystalline maze. For a moment, a shaft of light ran through him, and he vanished from where he'd been standing. The next breath, he was outside the iceberg altogether. Noah could feel the same chill in the air that had been in the memories. The iceberg was clearly the product of ice magic, the kind that must have leaked out when he absorbed the Lysandra template. He flexed a hand and watched frosted breath bloom from his palm, delicate rime crawling over his skin. He felt the change in his veins then, a cold flavor of power, latent and vast. Lysandra's strength was no rumor. Her iceborn blood could freeze even the Watchers who had once empowered her. Noah judged her a peak tier force on Runeterra, perhaps a tier 1.5 entity, second only to rise among mortal practitioners, and on par with or stronger than Syndra. Whatever label he applied, this was the strongest hero template he had summoned since he began collecting champions. Chapter 462, The Sudden Girl. After acquiring Lysandra's hero template, Noah had also inherited her ice bloodline, a potent lineage that granted enormous power and mastery over devastating ice magic. The purest forms of that bloodline, like the true ice of the Freljord's three sisters, even conferred a kind of immortality. The ice bloodline's strength was undeniable. Many of the Freljord's stronger figures, Ash, Sewanni, Braum, were iceborn, carrying diluted traces of that same power. Noah's new bloodline substantially increased his magical reserves. He felt his magic had multiplied several times over compared to before. That estimate was based on his inherent magic alone, not counting the boost from the Resolve rune, and even without the rune, it was a marked improvement. He had also gained the ability to wield ice magic. A slight emanation of power could form small ice peaks around him. Curious, Noah reached out and touched a nearby ice mound. Where his finger made contact, a smear of black bled across the white surface and quickly consumed the whole formation. The white mountains turned jet black, emanating a cold, oppressive aura. This was dark ice twisted by void influence. Lissandra's power could corrupt pure white ice into this corrosive black form. A faint trace of void energy pulsed from it. The ice bloodline itself was a gift tied to the void. It didn't rot the mind as readily as raw void powers, and Lissandra could wield some of that void energy. Noah didn't understand how the Watchers had crafted such a potent bloodline, but he knew leaving a mound of void-tainted ice here was unwise. He observed the dark ice for a moment, then stepped closer. Noah inhaled slowly. With a controlled motion, he drew out the void essence from the ice. The corrupt energy condensed into a stream of purple light and surged into his nose. As the Void Overlord, he could manipulate such energies easily. He could have made dark ice far stronger than this. To reproduce true ice like Lissandra did, he would need help from a powerful ice source, Yetis, or perhaps Asgard's icebox. If he could get that artifact, he might fabricate true ice as well. For now, he stripped the void power clean from the mound. The black sheen faded, and the ice returned to pale white. The remainder wasn't permanent. Cold magic like this would melt eventually under sunlight. As long as the sun shone on that side of the moon, heat would do the rest. If anyone from the nearby city took offense and wanted to come out and deal with it, Noah wouldn't stop them. Turning his attention to the summoning interface that hovered alongside him, Noah didn't need to return to his original summoning spot. The system moved with him. He swept through the 3 remaining light orbs. No second hero appeared. That didn't bother him. Summoning Lissandra had already been more than enough. Health potion, mana potion. The luck he'd used on the first summons seemed to have been spent. Doran's ring glowed faintly in his palm, a common starter item for many League players, magical but modest. He pocketed it anyway. It was worth keeping for the collection. With the Doran's blade and Doran's shield he had already acquired, he now owned all 3 classic starting items. One treasure chest still floated above the interface. Noah opened it. Its contents would grant him enough essence to perform another 10 pull, but he had already decided to wait until he returned to Earth to use his next summoning. His luck felt exhausted. He didn't want to push it here on the moon. 2 summoners spell Snowball. 2,000 points is decent. That brings me up to 7,400, back above 6,000, Noah murmured, pleased by the essence. Then he blinked at the second reward. Snowball? Why is everything I'm summoning today related to ice and snow? Snowball was an Aram-exclusive summoner spell. He didn't know what practical use it would have, but maybe it would prove useful later. He shrugged and stuffed the items into his pack. He was still deciding whether to go inspect the strange city that had appeared on the moon when he felt a sudden spatial fluctuation nearby. Someone was teleporting in, very close. Noah could have intercepted or blocked a teleport this near, but he hesitated. He wanted to see who would have the audacity to appear so close. A young woman materialized beside him. She wore a transparent helmet and fitted leather clothing, and at her side sat an enormous bulldog. The woman didn't waste time. "Hey, put your hand on Woundwort," she ordered. Before Noah could react properly, she stepped up and had the dog press its paw against him. The beast's paw was warm and surprisingly solid. The woman looked at Noah as if checking a mark, then activated another layer of spatial magic. Noah felt the world tilt and compress around him. He had been treated like some kind of survivor, apparently. Before he could form a question, the teleport finished. The moon and its ice-mottled landscape blurred away, and Noah was pulled through space into the city of Adelan. When the unfamiliar young woman put Noah's hand on the large dog, a silver-white V flared on its forehead. The dog released a ripple of spatial energy, and in an instant, the three of them were swallowed by a shimmering corridor. The next moment, they stepped out into a city Noah recognized at once. A translucent shield arced across the sky, and to his left, the iceberg he had created earlier still jutted from the ground. They had arrived in the city he had seen before. After they landed, the huge dog abruptly shook itself, sending Noah's hand and the woman's away. Then, tail tucked, it scuttled behind her with quick, nervous steps, staring at Noah with wary, frightened eyes. If one looked closely, the animal's body trembled. "Woundwort, what's wrong?" the woman asked, puzzled, as she drew the dog closer and stroked its cheek. "Are you scared of strangers?" Noah watched them for a moment. It made sense that an animal might sense the power inside him and react with apprehension. But when she called the dog Woundwort, something clicked in his memory. The name, the dog's odd marking, the young woman, and the alien city on the moon. This was Adelan. A rush of fragmented information came back from a past life he hadn't paid much attention to. The Inhumans, people with superhuman abilities, not unlike mutants, lived here. Noah hadn't watched the Inhumans shows. He'd heard they were poor, so he'd ignored them. Still, he'd picked up tidbits online, names like Black Bolt, and a woman named Crystal and her dog. Seeing Crystal beside the dog, the recognition snapped into place. Crystal's powers, control over the elements, manipulating wind, fire, water, lightning, were supposed to be formidable. He opened his senses and probed the city. Attilan's surface structures gave way to a vast undercity. The population clustered in a few sections, and the streets were oddly empty. As he reached outward with his perception, the young woman, who'd stopped comforting Woundwort when she heard his voice, turned to him. "Hello, I'm Crystal. This is Adelan," she said, studying him. Her eyes were curious. "Excuse me, are you from Earth?" Noah answered and kept his perception running. "Yes. Why do you ask?" "You're wearing clothes only people on Earth wear," Crystal said. She looked him over again. "Are you human?" "No, I'm an inhuman," she blurted, then corrected herself when she saw his expression. "Well, don't you know? You must be an inhuman." She frowned. "That iceberg outside? Did you make it with your power?" Crystal had been drawn by the sudden iceberg and had come running. In her experience, ordinary humans didn't manifest abilities like that. Noah smiled faintly. "You thought I was an inhuman? Is that why you pulled me in here?" "Yes. You were out there alone with nothing to protect you. That's dangerous." She nodded, relieved. Then she hesitated as she reconsidered his earlier words. "Don't you know you're an inhuman?" Noah shrugged. "I haven't heard of Inhumans. I only came here by accident." Crystal's expression shifted to one of speculative sympathy. "Maybe you grew up on Earth and never learned about us." She began filling in a story, an abandoned inhuman baby cast away to grow up on Earth, awakening powers alone. Then she paused, puzzled. "But how did your powers awaken without a Terrigen crystal?" "Terrigen crystal?" Noah echoed, touching his chin. The word stirred another memory. In the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. spin-off, there had been an obelisk containing that substance. S.H.I.E.L.D. had kept it in storage. And there were Inhumans on Earth, too. Daisy and her mother came to mind, and the group they were part of. Noah let the thoughts run through him. For all the odd coincidences and half-remembered stories, the scene before him, Crystal, Woundwort, the shielded city, was unexpectedly vivid. This was truly beautiful. There are Terrigen crystals on Earth, too? Then I guess that explains it. Crystal's face lit with comprehension. Noah glanced at the empty streets. "Why aren't there any people out here?" he asked. The city looked oddly deserted, the few visible groups huddled together as if taking shelter. "Oh, the citizens are in shelter," Crystal said. "Something spectacular and dangerous appeared in the sky a little while ago. Our king ordered everyone to stay inside. Didn't you see it?" Noah shook his head. He assumed whatever lights she'd seen were an effect of his earlier fight with the Celestials. He hadn't noticed any city here before. In a way, the Inhumans had been lucky not to be caught in that battle. He had tried to keep the moon itself from being harmed, but at the time, he He'd had no idea the Inhumans lived here. If he'd underestimated an attack and let it through, this city might have been devastated. Fortunately, the Inhumans had Black Bolt and other powerful defenders. You didn't see it? That's a pity. Crystal sounded disappointed. Then she remembered something else. By the way, I don't think I asked your name. Noah, he said simply. He was already thinking of going to meet Black Bolt and then leaving, and part of him still wondered whether the Ice Witch template he'd summoned would change Lysandra in any way. Noah, I have another question. Are there other Inhumans on Earth besides you? Crystal asked, curiosity bright in her eyes. Noah? She nodded once more and then fired off the question. No, Noah. Are there other Inhumans on Earth besides you? Noah repeated the question in his head and answered aloud. Yes. There should be quite a few. Besides scattered individuals, there's also a group organized on Earth. He kept his answer straightforward, recalling what he'd learned from other lives. He had always had a soft spot for Crystal. She was beautiful in his memory, but now his respect for her resembled the recognition he'd had for familiar, important figures like Tony Stark or Bruce Banner. Really? Crystal's eyes widened. That was news she'd expected to matter. If there were many more Inhumans on Earth, that could change everything. She'd been thinking of bringing them back to Attilan, though the city's space was already tight. Maximus had repeatedly argued that the crowding proved the case for seizing Earth, but Black Bolt had always refused. Come on, let's go. I'll take you to see my sister and brother-in-law, Black Bolt and Medusa. I need to tell them right away, Crystal said, excitement making her smile. She went to the living, bulbous plant creature at her side. Noah, put your hand on Woundwort again. Noah nodded and obliged. Woundwort had been wary of him at first, but after a while watching Noah and Crystal converse, it had relaxed. Still, when Noah touched it, the creature trembled a little. The glow on Woundwort's head flared, and in the blink of an eye, the three of them vanished from the street. They reappeared in the conference room. Medusa, Woundwort announced as they landed. Crystal greeted her sister at once. Noah looked around and took in the room. From a surge of energy, he could sense the strongest presence was a man in black leather, Black Bolt. Everyone in the chamber also turned to regard the stranger who had arrived with Crystal. Gorgon stepped forward into a defensive stance. Karnak's hands were already moving as he tried to analyze Noah, only to frown. The information Karnak's ability returned was a garble, a mess of scrambled code. Some aspect of Noah's nature refused his scrutiny. Crystal, who is he? Medusa asked. Noah's clothes fit no Attilan style. Attilan garments had small distinctive markings. His did not. He also stood out physically. If he'd been from Attilan, Medusa believed she would have noticed him before. This is Noah, Crystal said. He's one of our people, an Inhuman from Earth. He just told me there are many of our people on Earth, and a lot of them have already awakened their abilities. Karnak shook his head, confident. My ability tells me this person is not an Inhuman. He sounded absolutely certain. Even though he couldn't detect conventional weaknesses, his analysis insisted Noah was not one of their kind. He looked like a human, or something else. Crystal turned to Noah, confused but trusting Karnak's insight. Noah, are you not an Inhuman? Chapter 465, Dangerous Speech. Noah, aren't you an Inhuman? Crystal asked, suspicion threading her voice. When she first met Noah, she had assumed he was one of them. She had watched him form an iceberg and then turn it black, an astonishing feat she couldn't match. Crystal could shape ice, but she couldn't conjure an immense iceberg in minutes. In her mind, only Inhumans possessed powers like that. Ordinary humans simply didn't. That was why, at first glance, she had labeled him an Inhuman and let that idea shape everything else she noticed, or failed to notice. She hadn't asked why he was here, or why he'd been on the moon without a helmet or any protective gear. Even Inhumans, stronger than baseline humans after terrigenesis, could not survive extended exposure to a vacuum. When Crystal had gone out to retrieve him, she'd worn Attilan's portable environmental suit. Now, looking back, inconsistencies nagged at her. Her initial assumption that Noah was a rare Inhuman on Earth had blinded her to other oddities. His strange presence and the fact that he'd somehow been on the lunar surface unprotected should have set off alarms. That curiosity, however, had also driven her to secretly visit Earth despite strict orders. Black Bolt had forbidden her to travel to Earth with Woundwort. He knew Woundwort's abilities and feared the risks. But Crystal's desire to see the unknown world led her to defy him, slipping onto Earth in secret for short, furtive visits. Each time she'd return quickly, but those trips were enough for her to meet Noah and to pepper him with questions out of fascination. Karnak's voice cut through her recollection. He had declared Noah was not an inhuman. Crystal respected Karnak. His analytical skill made him one of Adelin's trusted strategists and advisors, so his words carried weight. The other Inhumans looked at Noah with guarded, searching eyes. Noah, however, remained calm under their scrutiny. He shrugged lightly and said levelly, "I never claimed to be an Inhuman. I'm human." "A human?" Crystal gasped, hand to her mouth. The answer hit everyone like a cold wave. Humans had been spotted in Adelin before, but always in bulky white spacesuits, never in ordinary clothes. Noah's casual attire made the revelation all the more bewildering. Had Crystal brought him here from Earth? Medusa leaned close to her sister and murmured, "Crystal, where did you find him?" Crystal stammered, "Outside Adelin City. I saw him use ice-based powers, so I thought he might be one of us." She felt suddenly unsettled. Even if Noah was human, he didn't seem dangerous. Was bringing him here risky? There were people in the room who hated humans. Maximus, in particular, snapped to life at the news. "A human! See, I told you this would be about humans!" Maximus shouted, stabbing a finger at Noah. "I told you, we don't pursue humans, but once they learn of us, they'll come for us. This man proves it." Noah frowned. The man's hostility was obvious. Maximus's voice rose until the chamber was tense. "Your Highness, the presence of a human in Attilan proves what I said. First we apprehend and interrogate this spy. Then we send troops to Earth." He pronounced his plan with theatrical certainty. Maximus had been waiting for an opening like this. His calls for preemptive action against Earth had always been dismissed by Black Bolt and the Council as paranoia. But a human on the moon, unarmored and unafraid, was evidence he could use. Though powerless himself, Maximus was politically shrewd. Eloquent, clever, and popular among Attilan's powerless citizens who saw in him someone who articulated their grievances. Quietly, without the family's knowledge, he had cultivated a following in the city. His lack of terragenic power made him relatable. His charisma made him dangerous. Karnak had long seen Maximus as a latent threat and had tried to warn Black Bolt. Each time Karnak pushed, Black Bolt would quiet him. Family ties restrained the king. He was loath to be overly harsh with his younger brother. That leniency had allowed Maximus to build influence at the edges of Attilan politics, and now he seized the opportunity to press his agenda in earnest. Chapter 466, Ice Sculpture Generator, Attacking Earth? Noah narrowed his eyes at Maximus's words. The man had just confirmed himself as the kind of villain everyone warned about. Dangerous, reckless. If Maximus could sway other Inhumans, Noah knew he had to be stopped. "Maximus, stop," Karnak said, frowning, cutting him off. Still, Karnak motioned to Gorgon to move. They didn't know why this human had come, but it was safer to restrain him first than risk an attack on Black Bolt. Black Bolt's brow tightened when he saw Gorgon step forward, and he made a warning sign. Medusa, standing beside him, began to translate, but Gorgon was already in motion. "Human boy, cooperate," Gorgon said flatly as he walked toward Noah. A nearly 2-meter-tall, black-skinned powerhouse advancing stone-faced would make most people flinch, but Noah only smiled faintly. He stood with his arms folded as a streak of white began to bloom at his feet. A cold spread outward from Noah, racing across the floor. Frost formed on the surface, and tiny ice crystals condensed in the air. Gorgon saw the white streak and tried to react, but the chill crawled up over his feet like a living thing. Within moments, ice coated his calves. The frost quickly thickened into a solid mass that pinned his legs from the waist down. Shock crossed Gorgon's face. He tried to shake free, to send a seismic wave through the floor, but the rigid ice held him fast. He couldn't even lift a foot to trigger his power. The cold slowed his thoughts. His breath steamed in the air, and his struggling grew weaker. "Gorgon!" everyone exclaimed. How could this human use powers like that? Maximus, who had been so loud a moment before, suddenly moved back behind the others, visibly unsettled. Karnak's muscles tensed. He slammed his foot and released a powerful surge, launching himself toward Noah like an arrow loosed from a bow. Though Karnak was the clan's strategist, he was also a fearsome warrior. Noah made no sweeping motion. As Karnak flew through the air, Noah exhaled, a soft breath that was not simply air but a mist of white. The vapor spread, engulfing Karnak mid-leap. Cold struck him instantly. Frost crawled over his skin, coalescing into a thick casing. Karnak froze into a human-shaped statue and crashed to the floor. The solid block of ice hit with a dull thud and slid only a short distance. Silence fell over the chamber. Two of the royal family's greatest warriors had been rendered immobile in an instant. Faces around the table twisted in disbelief. "No, Noah, stop!" Crystal shouted, panic ringing in her voice as she watched Gorgon and Karnak fall beneath the ice. She blamed herself for bringing him here. "Don't worry, Crystal. They're not in danger. I only restrained them," Noah said calmly. He reached out and melted a portion of the ice around Karnak's head so he could breathe. Inhumans, like humans, needed oxygen. "Now we can talk properly, right?" Noah asked, looking directly at Black Bolt. Karnak gasped as the thawed space over his face cleared. Black Bolt's expression eased when he saw his two lieutenants alive, though still bound. It had been Black Bolt's habit to remain silent and let Gorgon and Karnak handle disturbances. His power was too destructive to use in a crowded chamber where it might harm his family, Medusa, or Crystal. Black Bolt signed again. Medusa translated for Noah. "Who are you? What are you doing in Attilan?" Noah answered evenly. "I was passing by. I didn't expect to find a city on the moon. As for who I am," he paused. His gaze flicked to the central monitor in the conference room. An image was playing that he'd noticed when he walked in. The screen showed footage of a battle, him, standing against towering celestials. "You should be able to tell now," Noah said. On his skin, a purplish gold flame flared to life, bathing the cramped chamber in an otherworldly glow. The light reflected off the faces around the table and off the screen at the same time. Everyone stared. The moment they saw that same purplish gold light bloom on Noah, their eyes snapped to the monitor. The identical glow in the footage and on Noah left no doubt. A single realization swept the room. Medusa's voice trembled with shock. You are." The purple gold light washed over their faces, and shock flickered across every expression. Black Bolt's pupils constricted. This light was the same purple gold glare he had seen in the sky not long ago. The others, who were still standing, hadn't seen that light with their own eyes, but they recognized it from the image on the computer screen below. Crystal, who hadn't been at the council and hadn't heard Black Bolt's description, was less alarmed. She only felt a fierce, oppressive power radiating from the glow. You are," Medusa breathed, disbelief lacing her voice. Could this human before them really be the other entity who had fought that golden giant above the moon? If Black Bolt's account was true, this man's strength would be almost unimaginable. Black Bolt understood exactly what that implied. He had seen Noah and the Celestial clash and had had to throw himself into holding back the fallout. He knew the scale of their power. If Noah was angered here, Attilan might not survive the instant. Seeing the way Black Bolt dropped his posture, Noah did not press the attack. Black Bolt's fingers moved urgently, signs that Medusa translated aloud. "Esteemed sir, we mean no offense. Attilan bears no ill will toward Earth or its people." Medusa's voice followed each of Black Bolt's gestures. "Attilan's policy has always been peaceful coexistence with Earth. I hope you will not be angry because of what Maximus said." "That's right," Crystal added quickly, unsure of why Black Bolt and her sister were so humble now, but following their lead. "Black Bolt has always opposed attacking Earth, even though Maximus keeps proposing it." Maximus, who'd been enjoying his smug remarks earlier, glared from the back instead of answering. Noah's gaze flicked to Maximus and held a beat longer than it did for the others. The older brother's jaw tightened. He visibly trembled, and his knees shook under that scrutiny. Noah, though, chose not to make trouble. "I don't want to see Inhumans attacking Earth in the future," he said, and then with a casual sweep of his right hand, he dispelled the ice that still gripped two frozen figures. The ice that coated Gorgon and Karnak thinned into mist and evaporated. Both men collapsed as though drained of strength. A few seconds later, circulation returned, and they shakily hauled themselves to their feet. "Gorgon, Karnak!" Crystal ran to them and pressed both hands to their shoulders. Red light pulsed from her palms, warmth suffusing them. Her element mastery channeled heat into their chilled bodies, pushing the cold back and restoring blood flow. The two still trembled but nodded. Being cut down so easily humiliated them. Black Bolt caught their eyes and shook his head, signaling not to act rashly again. Crystal looked up at Noah. "Then why did you come to the moon?" she asked. "As I said, I was passing by," Noah answered. "A city appeared where there shouldn't be one. I came to see what was happening." He glanced around at the gathered Inhumans. He wondered, briefly and privately, whether they would trigger another mission event. After the way he'd browbeaten Maximus, though, he doubted anyone would be foolish enough to launch an attack on Earth now. If Maximus did act, it would at least give Noah more to deal with. Medusa had already guessed why Noah had come. Adelon's shield had been lost. "Our shield originally had an optical stealth function, to keep humans and outsiders from knowing we were here," she said. "But the shield was shattered by a crystalline object that fell from the sky, which is how Adelon was exposed." Noah only half heard the implication that she'd meant it was his arrival that had drawn that thing down. He had already learned the basics of that event from Crystal in private conversation, and he wasn't inclined to take responsibility. If blame belonged to anyone, he thought, it was the Celestial Tammut. He had confronted the main culprit, at least enough, in his view, to explain the outcome. He scanned the assembled Inhumans once more and decided it was time to leave. There was nothing here that required him to stay. He had warned Maximus, even if the madman still tried to send forces to Earth, it would merely be more work for him. "The one who damaged your shield was that golden giant," Noah said finally. "But if you want to go pick a fight with him, you won't get the chance." Black Bolt and the others met each other's eyes. None of them dared to challenge a Celestial. Noah's tone suggested he had done something about the golden giant himself. "All right," he added, addressing the group as he prepared to go. "Keep to your original stance, and if you have no hostile intent, if you want to visit Earth, I won't stop you." Chapter 468, Inhumans Rescue Mission? See you next time. Noah gave a final nod to Crystal, the first Inhuman he'd met on Adelon. If there was one thing that had impressed him about the Inhumans, it was this kind, gentle girl, even if their interaction had been brief. He intended to leave the moon and return to Earth. But as he was about to go, Crystal, realizing he was preparing to depart, called after him, voice small and hesitant. "Noah, was everything you said before true?" She was asking about his earlier claim, that there were still Inhumans living on Earth. Noah nodded, then vanished from the conference chamber in a flash of blue light. With his departure, the tension in the room finally eased. Everyone let out a breath and relaxed their faces. Crystal looked around, puzzled by the atmosphere. She turned to her sister and asked quietly, "Why were they so afraid of him?" "Crystal," Medusa said, "Grave, that human you brought here is one of the ones who caused the anomaly in the sky." Hearing that, Crystal's mouth fell open. She hadn't realized the extent of the danger she'd brought to Adelon. If Maximus had met Noah first, she shuddered at the thought. For a moment she felt foolish that she'd thought Noah a victim she'd rescued. The notion now seemed almost funny in its naivety. Gorgon, stretching, looked to Black Bolt and Karnak for direction. Black Bolt considered a beat, then signed instructions which Medusa translated for the assembly. "No change to our lives. Continue as usual. But Maximus must not bring up anything related to Earth again." No one objected. Even Maximus, still shaken by Noah's gaze, fell silent. The pressure from Noah had unnerved him more than anything. He had nothing left to say. "Oh, right," Crystal spoke up. "Noah told me there are still many of our kin on Earth. Some of them have already awakened and formed an organization." Awakened Inhumans? Black Bolt's brow tightened. He had known descendants had remained on Earth, those who didn't come to the moon, but he'd assumed they'd never undergone terrigenesis. Without terrigen crystals on Earth, their inhuman genes wouldn't have awakened. They would live outwardly as ordinary humans. If, however, there were Inhumans on Earth who had actually awakened, that was a very different problem. "We must bring them up here," Karnak said. "If they've awakened, humans will notice. Curiosity turns to study, control, even worse." Gorgon remembered Noah's earlier condition and raised the point. "But didn't that human say we should stay away from Earth?" Noah forbade harming humans, Crystal answered. He didn't say we couldn't rescue our own. Black Bolt closed his eyes and weighed the options, then signed again. Medusa translated, "We need more intel. Find the locations of our kin first. Send people to Earth to gather clues, quietly, without drawing attention." Black Bolt, Medusa, and Karnak broke off to plan. Maximus drifted away, dejected. Crystal wandered over to the console and tapped the surveillance feed, curiosity getting the better of her. "Gorgon, who do you think won?" she asked, pressing play. The screen showed the final moments, the purplish gold energy and the golden light flaring and then dissipating into the void, leaving only massive, empty arms where the lights had been. "Is that even a question?" Gorgon grinned. The human. He didn't look hurt at all. They watched the last recorded frames, the purple-gold energy retreating into the cosmos, the golden arms disappearing from their place on the lunar surface. The feed ended. Returning to Earth. A blue light flashed, and Noah reappeared in the spot where he'd first traveled to the planet's core, his underground lab. Almost immediately, he sensed something different in the air, a strong, concentrated trace of ice magic. The Ice Witch template in him, the Lysandra signature he'd summoned, gave him an affinity with cold and let him perceive that the lab had been under an icy veil not long ago. So his earlier guess was right. Something had altered Lysandra when he summoned that aspect of her. "Lysandra!" Noah murmured, and in an instant he vanished from one side of the lab and reappeared beside her on the other. Chapter 469, Lysandra's Rose. "Noah, you're back?" Lysandra said, looking up from the monitors that tracked the deviant eradication teams. She turned at the sound of his voice. The smile on her face put Noah instantly at ease. The Ice Witch template hadn't significantly altered her mind, a fact he was quietly grateful for. "How do you feel?" Noah stepped closer and set his hands on her shoulders, searching for any sign of disturbance. Lysandra wore a form-fitting gray knit dress, high-necked and off the shoulder, hugging her hips. The cutout at the chest revealed elegant collarbones, and the fabric clung to her figure with an understated, refined grace. Her skin was pale and flawless under the lab lights, and a few loose strands of her golden hair framed her face, softening the otherwise precise styling. Without any makeup, she still carried an air of noble calm. Noah's palm rested on the smooth skin of her shoulder. At first it felt warm and soft, but in the next instant, a chill bled through the surface, an icy pulse identical to the cold energy he carried himself. Lysandra's body had taken on the Ice Witch's bloodline as well. "I'm fine," she said, shaking her head slightly, voice steady. "While I was waiting for you, a power surfaced inside me, and memories that weren't mine appeared. They felt like the experiences of that other me you mentioned." Noah listened, the worry in his chest tightening. He'd experienced those foreign memories when he had activated the template and had the system protecting his mind. He'd learned to accept the fragments. Lysandra hadn't had that preparation. He feared the memories might overwhelm or rewrite her. "Lysandra," he said gently, "no matter what comes from those memories, you must remember they're not you. They're Lysandra from another world." She responded by lifting his hand, still warm in hers, and guiding it to her chest, holding it there between both of her hands. Noah felt the intimacy of the gesture, then removed his other hand from her shoulder and settled it over hers as he met her gaze. He couldn't tell whether she'd received only the other Lysandra's magical memories or the nearly 10,000 years of accumulated experience from the main universe version. He feared the latter. Poured directly into an ordinary mind, it would shatter someone. But Lysandra's expression remained composed. "I can store them separately," she said with a quiet smile. "I can observe them without letting them change me." As an artificial life form, she had methods of handling data and memory that humans didn't. Relief washed through Noah. If she could compartmentalize the foreign memories, they'd be safe. "Besides the memories," Lysandra continued, "I also received the power of the other me." She raised the hand Noah wasn't holding. Along its arc, frost formed, delicate crystals scattering through the air. A white cold condensed from her palm, a mist that thickened and coalesced into a single gleaming ice crystal. The nearby air whitened, vapor curling away from the frozen surface. Noah felt the chill, but was not unaccustomed to it. As he opened his mouth to ask how much power she'd taken, the crystal shifted. It seemed to move of its own accord, reshaping from an irregular shard into something deliberate. The tip unfurled, the edges softened. Petal by petal, it bloomed into a rose of clear, glittering ice. Cold vapor swirled in the spaces between its petals, each one carved with astonishing detail. Lysandra let go of his hand, then opened his palm and placed the ice rose there. Noah blinked at the delicate bloom, glinting in his hand. "I'm very happy that you care about me so much," she said. Their eyes met, hers dark and steady like an ocean in shadow. Noah stared for a beat too long, then pulled back by an embarrassed chuckle from Lysandra. He looked away and cleared his throat. "It's only right that I care about you," he managed, voice a little unfocused. He glanced at the rose again and thought, half to himself, "Shouldn't I be the one giving flowers?" He slipped the ice rose into his backpack with a practiced backhand motion and forced his gaze back to Lysandra, feeling the residual chill of the gift against his palm and the warmth of her hands where they had been. Lysandra watched Noah's movements, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, but she said little. Once Noah had settled his restless nerves, he asked the question he'd been holding back. "Lysandra, how much power did you gain from that ice witch?" Because they both shared the same name, Noah had been calling the Lysandra from the main universe the Ice Witch to avoid confusion. "From what I remember, I should have gained all of the Ice Witch's power," Lysandra answered without hesitation. 100%? Noah's eyes widened. If that were true, the power she'd inherited would match his, both of them having absorbed a full champion template. She nodded. "Come on then. Let's test it in the training room. I just summoned some new equipment too. We can try it out together." Noah took Lysandra's hand and led her to the pristine white training chamber he had built from a large amount of vibranium. It was designed to safely contain whatever they wanted to test. "No training dummy? Fine, I'll be the dummy." Noah chuckled as they entered the spacious metal room. Noah released Lysandra's hand and stepped to the center of the room, turning to face her. "Show me. Use the Ice Witch's most practiced spells." He meant her in-game abilities: Glacial Path, Ice Shard, Ring of Frost, and Frozen Tomb, the magics she had used most frequently in the Ice Witch's memories. "Glacial Path." Lysandra waved her hand lightly. Ice condensed in the air, sculpting into a blue figure built of glittering crystals. Glacial Path. Lysandra manipulated the forms of the dead with her ice, turning them into frozen thralls that hunted enemies autonomously. The cold they radiated slowed foes, and when the magic dissipated, the thralls shattered in a burst of final damage. There were no corpses for her to manipulate now, but the condensed ice could still attack. Under Lysandra's control, the crystalline figure shot toward Noah, trailing shimmering shards. If it struck someone, ice would permeate their body and could seize control even if it didn't kill them. The construct moved at breakneck speed. Noah pulled a massive shield from his backpack and swung it into the path of the blue figure. The tower shield smashed the crystal construct to pieces. Shards that were struck vanished, while the rest crumbled into ordinary ice crystals that scattered across the floor. Those dissipated crystals didn't simply evaporate. Petricite in the shield absorbed them. Noah examined the shield he'd summoned. It was Randuin's Omen, the sturdy tank item from the game, forged not of metal, but of a peculiar stone called petricite from Demacia. The pale stone had a reputation for suppressing magic. Demacians used it to bind mages and to craft defenses against sorcery. In truth, petricite didn't suppress so much as contain and absorb magic. It was an effective magical reservoir, able to store vast amounts of power and, when full, even release it. Silas had discovered this property in lore, which explained some of his abilities. The shield in Noah's hands bore the Light Shield family crest of Demacia, proof of its origin and a reason for its strong anti-magic properties. Lysandra didn't hesitate. She flicked her fingers and released a sliver of black ice toward the shield. The spell condensed into spear-shaped projectiles mid-flight, their tips cold and razor-sharp. This was Ice Shard, a transformation of magical energy into spears that pierced a target and then shattered into fragments to hit enemies behind. Noah's ears picked up the sharp whoosh. He raised Randuin's Omen and planted it before him. The black ice spears struck the petricite with crisp cracks. On impact, the dark crystals shattered into plain white ice and scattered. Again, the shield absorbed the magic. As the petricite took in the energy, Noah noticed a faint purple tinge spreading along the shield's edge. Void energy. Void-infused dark ice, like the spears Lysandra had fired, left a trace of void power behind when absorbed. Noah watched the purple trace with interest. Can petricite absorb void? Will it mutate after taking on too much? He couldn't help but wonder. It wasn't a major concern. He had ways to erase void energy with a gesture. But the sight of the purple staining the pristine stone was unusual. Noah, don't get distracted. Lysandra's voice cut in softly from behind him. Before he could finish the thought, an extreme cold exploded through the training room. A towering column of dark ice rose from the floor, surging all the way up to the ceiling. Chapter 471. The magic engraved in Randuin's omen. Dark ice erupted through the training room, shooting up until it hit the vibranium ceiling over 10 meters above. Unable to rise further, it spread outward instead, branching like a colossal frozen tree. This was the Frozen Tomb, Lysandra's deadliest spell aside from her true ice magic. It could encase foes in hard, despairing ice and let them slowly be consumed by cold. At the center of the room stood that dark ice tree, and at its base Noah lay frozen, his face locked in the moment he had stared at Randuin's omen. Lysandra stepped out from behind the trunk, smiling as she touched the cold surface, and then moved toward Noah. An icy path formed from where she'd appeared to the tree. Along it, thick, razor-sharp spikes jutted out to either side. In an instant, she reappeared behind Noah. This was her glacial path, a unique ice technique that let her traverse instantly along her own ice. But before she could act further, a sliver of white flickered inside the dark trunk. The white spread rapidly through the black dark ice until it had devoured it completely. The frozen tree became a white frost tree, and the block shattered from within. Noah burst free. Cracks spidered across the ice crown on the ceiling the moment the trunk fractured, and chunks began to fall. Both of them were ice magic masters, though, and under that influence the falling ice dissolved into a shimmer of crystal snowflakes before it hit the ground. How impressive! Your moves are oddly similar to the nano-attacks I use, Noah heard Lysandra say, her voice equal parts curious and pleased as he knocked snow from his shield. Then again, you're another self from a different world. It's not so strange that we overlap, she added. The purple markings on the petricite great shield were far more numerous than before Noah had been frozen. Randuin's omen had begun absorbing the magic of the dark ice tree while they had been encased. The shield could drink magic, but the tree had been woven with void power. If the omen absorbed that raw void, Noah worried it might destabilize or even explode, so he siphoned and refined the void energy himself to prevent the artifact from being ruined. The purple sigils and the blue coating along the shield's face shifted like a living thing, snaking toward Noah's hand on the handle and being absorbed by him one by one. When the last of the void energy fed into him, Noah felt the accumulation in the petricite reach a threshold. It wasn't the shield's absolute absorption limit, but it was enough to trigger the runes carved into Randuin's omen. Randuin's omen wasn't a mere block of pure petricite. Its true power came from a potent spell inscribed into it by its maker. Once the omen had stored sufficient magic, it could channel that energy through the petricite and cast the spell it held. Noah tightened his grip and focused, triggering the ward within the shield. Magic bled out of the petricite, following the patterns etched along its face as it began to weave a complex effect. In an instant, a peculiar force field unfolded with Noah at its center. Snowflakes that drifted into it didn't freeze so much as slow. Each flake descended at a crawl, nearly imperceptible to the eye. Time itself seemed to lag inside that bubble. This was the spell carved into Randuin's omen, the active skill known in the game as humility. Its effect was straightforward. It slowed. The force field glowed a pale orange, and anything caught inside was pulled into a fraction of normal time. Lysandra, standing opposite him, blinked slowly as the field expanded. Her lashes drooped, and for a moment her movements lagged. But she didn't stay slowed long. A flash of magic flared across her form, and her motions snapped back to normal. Noah kept the humility field active. Watching her shrug free of the deceleration confirmed something he had already begun to suspect. Humility suppressed only the body, not the mind. Those with strong internal energy or exceptional physicality could shake off its effects, the way Lysandra had. It would falter against powerful opponents then, though it could still be effective if used at an unexpected moment. "Noah, how did it feel inside that field?" he asked, looking at Lysandra as she recovered. "Physically, my movements slowed, but my mind wasn't affected," she replied. "I could still perceive and think clearly about everything around me." Noah nodded. The field could restrain motion, but not thought. Against enemies who could push through the slowing, its usefulness would be limited. Still, in the right situation, an instant of slowed time could be decisive. After keeping humility up for several dozen seconds, Noah noticed the magic in Randuin's omen steadily draining. He estimated the remaining charge could sustain the field for perhaps another minute. The consumption was heavy. He cut the spell and slid Randuin's omen back into his pack. The test was over. Noah's verdict, a divine artifact for bullying the weak. Chapter 472, Processing. Completed, ready for new summons. For Noah, Randuin's omen was mostly a tool for bullying weaker opponents. It offered little against truly powerful foes like the Celestials he might face next, neither as defense nor as a means of absorbing magic. It might, however, have unexpected uses against powerful mages, though such enemies were rare in the Marvel world. Still, Noah thought it worthwhile to pry a little petricite from Randuin's omen for study. Petricite was a valuable material. With enough research, he might even figure out how to mass-produce it. If that were possible, he could use it in weapon manufacture, integrate it into the Morning Star's armor, or even make petricite golems like Galio. He resolved to find an opportunity to scrape off some stone powder later. Chipping off a whole chunk would ruin the item's look. But that could wait. First, there was one pressing matter. "Lysandra, come. Let me examine you first." There was no other meaning to Noah's words. He simply wanted to inspect her. After taking on the Ice Witch template, Lysandra had acquired the Ice Bloodline, a gift from the Void. That power had proven surprisingly stable. Ice Witch Lysandra had walked the Freljord for nearly 10,000 years without any strange mutations. Still, it wasn't Noah's void power, and he felt uneasy. He needed to be sure. Lysandra nodded and extended her hand. Noah took her small hand and began to sense the new void energy within her. Energy that, like the void power that had initially entered him with the Ice Bloodline, had its origin in the League of Legends universe. He absorbed that energy into himself briefly, then pushed his own void power back into her, reshaping the Bloodline's void energy. He also left a coordinate to his void dimension inside her, an access point she could use to draw void power from Noah's domain. He could do this because he'd done similar things before, but he hadn't used this method on Lysandra or Gwen until now. Neither previously had a stable way to utilize void energy like the Ice Bloodline. Void power was dangerous, and he'd been cautious. Now, with Lysandra's Ice Bloodline present and compatible, Noah thought he could research the interaction between that bloodline and his void power and potentially replicate something similar for Gwen or his other subordinates. After he finished, Noah released her hand and looked up. "All right, Lysandra, I'm done. I left a coordinate in your body so you can access void power. You can call on it whenever you need." Lysandra closed her eyes, felt for the coordinate, then raised her hand. A thin thread of purple void energy unfurled in her palm. Noah watched the shimmering light. "Void power is dangerous. Be careful using it." "I will," she replied, then drew the energy back into herself. Noah moved on to test the equipment he'd summoned earlier, the Wayfinder and the Boots of Swiftness. The Wayfinder looked like a canvas backpack with blue crystal pendants around its edge. When worn, its magic amplified the wearer's movement speed, and as the wearer moved, it left a trail of beneficial magic that boosted allies' speed. The Boots of Swiftness resembled snow boots, rimmed with a circle of white fur at the top, some creatures' fur from Runeterra, and each boot was decorated with a white feather. The feathers hummed with powerful magic. That was likely the primary source of the boot's speed-enhancing ability. The boots granted acceleration and reduced slow effects, though they felt a bit tight on Noah's feet. He wondered if Gwen could modify the size. She was a tailor, after all. He examined the equipment, then drew out the random hero fragment, Berserker Olaf fragment. Olaf, not great, Noah muttered. The fragment felt mediocre. Olaf was a tribal warrior from the Freljord who, cursed by a prophecy of a peaceful death, sought glorious ends and repeatedly sought death only to survive. His power came from the berserker's blood and brutal combat skill, aided by a pair of axes infused with true ice. He had slain many monsters in his quest, but the fragment's bonus was too small for Noah to bother synthesizing directly. It would serve as fusion material later. By then, Noah had fully processed and integrated all the items from the 10 draw. He still had 7,400 essence, enough for one more summon. He hadn't done a second 10 draw on the moon. He was wary of draining his luck with 2 consecutive 10 draws, so he planned to wait until he returned to Earth. The training room felt like a good place to summon. Its pure white space was clear and auspicious, which suited gacha metaphysics. Noah reopened the summoning panel and rubbed his hands. Another 10 draw. He didn't try to hide the summons from Lysandra. She already knew he could pull things from other worlds. Chapter 473, Lady Luck is smiling. Lysandra, give me a lucky kiss, Noah said suddenly, opening the summon panel and pausing, anticipation bright in his eyes. Before he could summon, he had to perform the pre-summoning ritual. He'd already tried praying to the moon god once. This time, he chose a different superstition, a lucky kiss. After Lysandra handed him an ice crystal rose, Noah noticed something else. Enhanced by the Ice Witch, Lysandra's template, her aura now felt completely human. It was as if the template had filled the last gap, and suddenly the distance between them could be drawn a little closer. Faced with Noah's bold request, Lysandra only smiled faintly. Her lips, tinted a soft pink, parted. Noah, do you really believe a kiss will bring you luck? He wanted to say he believed it because she was his goddess of luck, but that sounded too flippant. He hesitated and didn't answer. Seeing his embarrassment, Lysandra's smile deepened, like she was savoring the moment. She glided across the quiet cultivation room. The click of her high heels echoed, each step a steady rhythm that thrummed in Noah's chest. She lifted her left hand and gently brushed his cheek, cupping his face. Noah watched her perfectly beautiful face draw closer. Her lips pressed against his cheek, just beside his mouth, not directly to his lips, but he felt the warmth and the faint, accidental touch of their mouths. The contact, tender and brief, set his heart racing. Heat rushed through him as if a flame had been lit inside. The resolve rune where it sat seemed to awaken, pulsing with the rise and fall of his emotions and releasing a surge of magic. Energy swelled in Noah and flowed outward like a soft breeze, scattering the snowflakes around them and making Lysandra's hair stir. As she stepped back, her fingertips brushed his cheek like a feather, leaving him restless and flushed. As a virgin in both his lives, Noah was clearly overwhelmed by being teased by Lysandra. Even the air he exhaled carried a ripple of magic. "Heh, I hope this brings you luck," Lysandra said, laughter light and teasing. Noah pursed his lips, savoring the moment, then pressed the 10 summon button. A blue vortex opened before him, and orbs streamed through it one by one, arriving before Noah. Manaposh 6, Hextech Rocket Belt, and Fox, Lava Giant Malphite. As Noah clicked the 4th orb, the scene he'd seen on the moon replayed. The orb darted toward the spot between his brows again. A smile began to form on Noah's face, but before it fully appeared, he was pulled into a barrage of memory fragments, connecting to Malphite's brain. Malphite, so big. Noah's vision filled with ancient history. In Runeterra's distant past, when ancient Shurima was at its height, a vassal state called Acathia chafed under Shurima's dominance. They opened a rift to the void, hoping to use its power against the god warriors who enforced Shurima's will. Instead, the void crawled out and devoured them. Acathia didn't overthrow Shurima, the void consumed them first. When ancient Shurima realized the horror they had unleashed, they sent their most powerful ascended, godlike warriors to stop the spread. Even they struggled against the endless tide of void creatures pouring from the rift. Empress Sataka and many ascended sacrificed themselves to halt the invasion. Most survivors bore void corruption, and Shurima began its decline. Still, at terrible cost, they managed to seal Acathia's rift. These were shards Noah pieced together from memory fragments. The The scenes he was experiencing focused on the middle of that void war, when the void breached as far as Ixtal, then a province of Shurima. An ascended elemental mage from Ixtal, named Nizuk, discovered the void's boundless nature and petitioned Empress Sataka to let him bring a new, terrible weapon into the Voidlands to suppress it. Noah remembered Nizuk from Ezreal's background when he'd summoned Ezreal earlier. Nizuk's gauntlets had later become the Ascended gauntlets worn by Ezreal and Kassadin. Sataka agreed, and from Ixtal, a colossal aerial fortress rose, a monolith as large as a city that blotted out the sky. It flew toward Acathia, leaving scorched earth in its wake. Even the yellow sands turned to molten lava. Chapter 474, Frowning, the Lava Beast. The monolith was a living, giant stone, created by the Ascended Nizuk, together with the great elemental mages of Ixtal, and possessed of world-ending power. While it moved, its core was manned by those elemental mages, maintaining and directing its might. As the monolith sailed into the void, its bulwarks bristled with god warriors, channeling relentless torrents of magic downward. The fortress entered the void battlefield, and an unprecedentedly brutal clash erupted, violence and scale unseen anywhere else in Runeterra. If such power had been unleashed over another continent, the land itself would have been glassed. But in the void, it barely rippled. Instead, the void struck back. Void influence chewed at the monolith, carving deep scars across its surface and blackening its skin until the living rock was no more than a charred ruin. The Ixtal tongue called it Malphite, broken stone. Nizuk refused to relent. In a desperate gambit, he gathered the Ascended and Elemental mages aboard the monolith and tried to drive every ounce of their power into the structure, burning his bridges to force a do-or-die stand against the void. It was an act of raw courage and terrible miscalculation. Normally, the monolith could, with great effort, slowly repair itself even as the void eroded it. But the sudden surge of raw magic destabilized its massive body. The monolith could not contain the strain. Under that terrible pressure, it fractured. The city-sized rock collapsed, plummeting toward the earth. Had the monolith slammed into a continental plate intact, the impact would have reshaped continents. Instead, it struck a void rift and shattered. Most fragments vanished into the void. The rest were scattered across the land or buried deep beneath it. Even when broken, the monolith's fragments retained sparks of consciousness. They writhed on the earth, struggling to recombine into a whole. The void, to whatever extent it understood its foe, bled life from those pieces. One by one, the fragment's spirits were leached away until they became nothing more than inert, weathered stones. But not every shard was claimed. One fragment fell so deep into the earth that the void never found it. Buried and hidden, it lay undisturbed and survived. Centuries passed. When that buried fragment finally stirred, it no longer resembled a mere jagged rock. It grew limbs and a head. It clawed its way up through soil and root, blinking into a world that had changed. It realized the void had been sealed, but it had only a sliver of its former self. A voice lived in the fragment's heart, whether a last whisper of its original body or the memory of a lost master. It could not tell, telling it that the void would return. Whatever the voice was, the fragment accepted its warning and its duty. It adopted a name that reminded it of its brokenness and purpose: Malphite. Malphite walked Runeterra, gathering strength. From Targon in the south to the Freljord in the north, its legend spread. Over time, that single fragment grew, gathering magic and power until it became a thing of awe and fear. Noah watched the memory play out from a third-person distance and felt a strange mismatch with the Malphite he'd known from the posts and jokes. In his head, Malphite had always been memeable, a smart Malphite, a single-minded mountain of a champion. All Malphite mains share one brain, a frown, a lava giant. He had not expected such a tragic origin story. So that's how Malphite came to be? He's actually an anti-void vanguard, Noah thought. But if that was true, if he now carried Malphite's power, why was Malphite so enormous? If I absorb that power, won't something weird happen to me? He swallowed. The Malphite in the memory was nearly 100 meters tall. The image he'd seen earlier, the one posted in the previous chapter, showed a future Malphite hundreds or even thousands of meters across, kilometer tall in its ultimate form. If Malphite could grow that vast, what would happen to Noah after taking on part of its power? He decided to check his body. The memories he'd watched had already merged some of Malphite's essence with him. With a single intent, Noah withdrew from the memory stream and opened his eyes. A fleck of light flashed in his pupils. What had taken an instant in that other plane felt immediate now. Noah felt changes. Where summoning the Frost Witch had altered him on a magical level, Malphite reached into him physically. It was like a several hundred-meter mountain compressed into a man barely 1.8 meters tall. That was how his body felt, coiled and dense. Fine cracks spidered along the edges of his skin. They were not wounds, but fissures like cooled lava, hairline seams through living stone. Beneath them he felt an expanding potential, as if he could unfurl and tower hundreds of meters tall at will. His clothes were starting to grow tight, not because they had shrunk, but because his body was quietly growing. Chapter 475, The Power of Terror. When Noah summoned the hero template of Malphite, the lava giant, his body actually began to change. It was the first time a summoning had produced a visible physical alteration. Noah guessed it was because Malphite's true form was enormous. Most of the heroes he'd summoned before had been human-sized. Heimerdinger had been short, but still human scale. Malphite was different. In his memories from Runeterra's modern history, he'd been a colossal stone man, hundreds of meters tall. That kind of mass being folded into a human host would do strange things. Noah felt his body swell against the vibranium clothing he wore. The t-shirt and pants were woven of vibranium threads, exceptionally strong and hard to tear, so they resisted the expansion. He didn't want another wardrobe casualty. He'd already ruined one set of clothes today. Then he realized the transformation was controllable. He could command it. Slowly he stopped the swelling. The rock fissures on his face smoothed back into skin, and his frame returned to its normal human proportions. He checked himself thoroughly and let out a relieved breath when he found no odd organs or permanent deformities. "Lysandra, when I closed my eyes, did you see anything happen to my body?" Noah asked. Lysandra had been watching him closely. "Noah, from the moment you closed your eyes to when you opened them was less than a second. I didn't see any special changes during that instant." "The biggest thing was after you opened your eyes," Lysandra replied, shaking her head. Although the system injected the template in an instant, Noah always lingered in the memories it gave him afterward, adding almost a second of adjustment time. So that was it. The system only needed a flash to seed the hero panel and trigger a transformation. This time it had packed a stone man several hundred meters tall into him. Even Noah struggled to picture how the system did it, but he'd seen its feats before and didn't waste time on the mechanics. He turned his attention to the new strength. Noah lifted a foot and set it down gently. Boom. Creak. The vibranium floor of the training chamber caved inward beneath that single soft step, and the entire room trembled. Vibranium was one of the hardest metals he knew of, with powerful energy-absorbing properties. It should have taken far more force to dent it. Noah stared at the rupture and realized something fundamental. Inside his current body was an entire Malphite, condensed. From the memories, Noah estimated the stone man had been around 600 meters high, more like a small mountain. A solid piece that size, minus hollows, moisture, and vegetation, would weigh on the order of 1 to 2 million tons. If that much mass were somehow condensed into a roughly 1.8-meter human form, the force contained would be unimaginably terrifying. Of course, he doubted his mass had instantly become 1 to 2 million tons. If it had, his gentle step would have cratered not just the lab, but the entire coast, and he would have sunk through the ground like a driven stake. The system probably limited the effective mass until he fully transformed into Malphite's true form. Still, the fact that a casual step could punch through vibranium proved how dangerous his body could be now. Even small movements could have catastrophic effects. There was a problem. The power surge felt imbalanced and raw. He could feel the overwhelming strength, but controlling it precisely was difficult. His gentle step had produced a massive tremor. At least he was in a vibranium-lined chamber. If he'd been on the manor above ground, he might have collapsed the underground room and dragged the seaside estate into the sea. Noah stopped moving and closed his eyes, concentrating. From the first summoning until now, the system had never bungled an integration. Every template it had grafted into him had been converted into something usable and stable. Even dangerous forces like void power had been reshaped into forms he could handle. This time, the surge felt violent, but it was still his body and, in the end, his control. He calmed his breathing and scanned every muscle and nerve, feeling the storm of strength settle under his skin. He synchronized with the Resolve rune, using its harmonizing flow to clear and temper the new power. Bit by bit, the rawness eased. The tremors faded, and Noah felt the beginnings of a leash on the terrible force coiled inside him. He didn't yet have perfect precision, but he could already sense the path to it: practice, calibration, and the same steady will that had tamed every previous ability the system had given him. Chapter 476, The Power to Quell the Riots. The lottery continues. It was impossible to instantly master a force as vast as a mountain. Noah knew that. Even he couldn't fully control it in a few minutes. All he needed for now was to make sure that none of his movements would spill that raging power out into the fragile room around him. The finer points of strength control could be trained slowly later. Maybe he'd even work on it with something silly, like training with eggs, a la Shaolin soccer gag. He shut his eyes, held his breath a moment, then opened them and exhaled. Whew, that single breath swept through the cultivation chamber like a storm dragon unleashed, filling the space with a fierce compressive wind. The air itself seemed to have been squeezed together and then released with devastating force. Lysandra, who was standing closer, had her long, neatly coiled hair flung into a tumble. It streamed out behind her like a golden waterfall caught in a gale. She raised a hand, smoothed it back, and hit every ventilation control in the cultivation room to let the compressed airflow out of the vibranium chamber. Noah's exhalation had no foul smell. Anything like impurities would have been impossible at his current level. His body had been transformed, legendary, unpolluted, not needing grain and undirtied by dust, able, in mythic terms, to survive on wind and dew. Of course, Noah wasn't about to become an ascetic. He loved good food too much. He enjoyed life's pleasures. And now, with a stomach that could directly digest anything he ate, he wouldn't even have to use the restroom anymore. After that long breath, Noah opened his eyes and pulled his foot out of the pit he'd been standing in. He stepped back onto a flat surface and tested himself with a few hops, switching feet as he went. The motions produced no sudden surges or losses of power. He'd calmed the force, at least for the moment. Relieved, Noah looked up at Lysandra and noticed her slightly mussed hair. He understood what had happened and cleared his throat. "Are you all right, Lysandra?" "I'm fine, Noah," she replied, smoothing her hair back with a practiced hand. The stray strands settled instantly into their usual sleekness. "How are you?" The power in your body increased to an unpredictable level. She sounded concerned because, from her perspective, the energy in Noah's body had spiked to immeasurable heights. Faint force fields had flickered around him, like condensing a mountain hundreds of meters tall into a 1.8-meter human, producing a massive mass and density and even a localized gravitational field, similar in principle to a planet's core. But when Noah opened his eyes, the field calmed. The red alert indicators in Lysandra's instruments faded back to a steady green. "No worries, I'm fine. I just got a very powerful force and lost control for a moment. It's stabilized now," Noah said, clenching his fists. He could imagine the lava giant's strength that now lived in him, a creature hundreds of meters tall, millions of tons, charging at supersonic speed, mountains collapsing, earth cracking. The destructive power was terrifying and terrifyingly real in his hands. "Hold on a moment, Lysandra. I still have summoned items to check," he told her. He hadn't finished viewing all the results of the 10-pull summon. 5 light orbs and a treasure chest remained on the summon panel. Lysandra nodded, and Noah tapped the orbs floating before him. The 5 items resolved in turn: Hextech-powered plating, defense tower, Hextech generator, control ward Pike 3, sorcery elixir. Hextech, 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 so many Hextech items. Noah clicked his tongue as 9 items hovered on the panel in total. Lately, complete items had been appearing more often in summons. Components were becoming rarer. He was glad, no more scavenging for parts. Most of the equipment this pull bore the Hextech prefix. He selected the Hextech rocket belt and transformed its icon into a physical object, holding it in his hands. True to its name, It was a belt fitted with 4 rocket thrusters, one at each corner. Noah imagined wearing it. Would the rocket flames burn him? He'd have to find out later. He didn't unbox the other large Hextech devices. They were clearly bulkier and not for immediate inspection. The Hextech generator's icon showed a yellow mechanical device, a circle with 3 cat ear-like semicircles and blue magic energy flowing at its center. That would be invaluable. Noah could shortcut a lot of his Hextech research by studying a finished energy converter. The Hextech-powered plating's icon and description indicated a set of Piltover Hextech power armor. It was a mass-produced technological suit that offered strong defense while using Hextech energy to boost the wearer's speed and strength. The in-game icon only showed the helmet and part of the shoulders, but the implications were clear. A wearable reinforcement suit powered by Hextech. Chapter 477. There are more and more strange things. Another new piece of equipment I haven't seen before? Noah muttered, staring at the Hextech-powered plating. From the icon and description, it was clearly another Hextech item, like the 2 he'd found earlier, but he'd never seen this one before. That meant it must have been added after his first death, like the electrically sensitive 3-wheeled blade he'd encountered. Noah suspected this set of Hextech armor was a later, more mature product of Piltover's Hextech research. In the League of Legends universe, Jace and Victor had only recently cracked Hextech energy, so mass-produced, battle-ready plating like this shouldn't exist so soon, unless someone else had advanced the tech. Now that the armor was in his hands, Noah could study it, reverse engineer it, and maybe even set up an assembly line. But he didn't yet know how it performed. He'd have to test it before deciding on mass production. Even if he could produce it, he didn't have many people who would wear heavy armor. Most of his subordinates were robots. Still, he could convert the plating into self-powered drones, turning them into a new model of Hextech-driven automatons. After checking the 3 newly summoned items, Noah put the Hextech belt in his hand and stowed the other 2 iconized items in his backpack. He skimmed past the remaining health potions and wards and shoved them into his pack without much thought. The new potions would be taken back to the lab for research. The ones already on the shelf could just gather dust in his backpack. He hadn't needed potions in a long time. He didn't need to replenish mana or health. Then he noticed 2 unexpected things in the summon panel. Dummies and a turret. With the potions and wards tucked away, only 3 icons remained: a target dummy, a turret, and an amplification codex. Noah set the codex aside for a moment. His attention was on the dummy and the turret. He'd been thinking, while testing Lissandra's Ice Witch skills earlier, that a training mode damage dummy would be handy. He wouldn't have to use himself as the test subject. Now, the summon had actually produced a target dummy. It reminded him of his old life. Look at an item online for a little too long, and the next time you opened Taobao, it would pop up in your recommendations. System: I urgently need the Star-Forging Dragon King, the Star God Phoenix, or the Shanghai Scroll. Anyone will do. Hurry up. Unsurprisingly, the system didn't answer. Noah pouted and dragged the target dummy icon into his hand. Snap! He flung it down on the floor. A training dummy appeared in front of him like a field scarecrow, a metal base, a wooden pole, and a wooden effigy dressed in a familiar, ridiculous outfit. A green hat with big ears crowned the head. It looked suspiciously like a certain Yordle whose death toll could circle the globe many times over. A red target hung on its chest, several wooden arrows still embedded. Target dummy will not attack or move, serves only as a target for attacks. Automatically repairs itself if destroyed. P.S. Dressed like one explosively handsome Yordle. This description had to be written by Timo, Noah grumbled. Summoning the dummy was amusing, but it was basically a glorified punching bag. He flicked the dummy's head with a finger. Instead of flying apart, the wood crumbled into powder and drifted away. Then the damaged area began to shimmer into a ghost-like shape that slowly solidified. The dummy reassembled itself into its original form. I don't know if that's magic or some rule-based effect, Noah said. He couldn't tell what power repaired it. Maybe he could study it later and learn something, but for now he'd keep it as a curiosity. He grabbed the pole and tossed the dummy to the edge of the training room. The next icon that surprised him was the turret. You can summon a tower too? Noah said, half amused, half incredulous. Given the dummy, a tower didn't feel so outlandish. The system was clearly expanding beyond summoning just heroes and gear. Strange things were starting to appear with increasing frequency. He didn't erect the turret in the training room. It would probably be huge, and the room didn't need defending. The island base would be a much better place for something like that. Noah turned back to the amplification codex. It wasn't a complete item, just a crafting component, but it was precisely what he needed. I have the amplification codex. I can finally finish the Book of Murder, he mused. He'd already summoned the Dark Seal before, the soul-absorbing ring that had collected a lot of souls recently. The ring was ready for an upgrade. The codex was the missing piece. Now, with the codex in hand, Noah could synthesize Mei's Soul Stealer. He clicked the amplification codex icon. A brief flash of light and a magic book materialized in his hand. When he brought the codex close to the Dark Seal on his finger, both objects pulsed with light. Chapter 478, The Power to Enslave the Soul. Come on, synthesize, Noah said, bringing the amplification codex closer to the Dark Seal. Both items glowed. The Dark Seal detached from Noah's finger on its own and floated above the codex. The two objects drifted toward each other until Noah let go of the amplification codex, and it hovered, turning its pages from the first one by one without any wind. As the Dark Seal hovered over it, each turned page drew off a wisp of soul power that merged into the book. When the soul power integrated, the text on that page faded away. The words hadn't been useful magic. Noah had already skimmed this codex when he first summoned it. The script had looked like meaningless garble, impossible to read. When the codex had finished its automatic turning and the Dark Seal's soul power had cleared the last lines, the ring floated down, and the instant it touched the codex, transformed into a shaft of light and merged into the book. A flash of synthesizing light enveloped the two items. This time, there was no ringing of an anvil and hammer, only a low buzzing of energy. Seconds later, the light dissipated, and a new item appeared before Noah, a strange, crimson-covered book. Its cover burned bright as flame, yet bore no inlaid patterns. As Noah reached toward the red volume, it began turning its pages on its own. Wisps of purple soul energy drifted off the pages like smoke, hovering around the book as if aware of themselves, congregating, dispersing. When the pages reached the center, a brilliant energy condensed and took shape. A soul eye formed from pure energy. The eye scanned left and right as though surveying this world, then fixed on Noah. He stopped moving, curious whether this Mei's Soul Stealer, now the Book of Murder, had its own consciousness, like the World Ender's magic hat. The soul eye studied him for a moment and then slid back into the book. The book closed, floated up, and settled into Noah's hand. It was heavy. Noah confirmed what he'd suspected. The book had a mind of its own. Book of Murder? Soul-stealing scroll? Are you conscious? If you can hear me, respond. He tapped the cover. There was no response, so he prodded harder, scraping at it until a thread of soul power unfurled from the pages and formed a translucent soul hand that gently pushed his finger away. Noah stopped. Another member had joined his collection of equipment. Aloof, it seemed. He opened the book to inspect it, not at the beginning, but where the soul eye had appeared, the center. The pages there were blank. He flipped through more, still blank, until he turned back to the first page. Then the pages began to fill. An image appeared on the first page, the Hedgehog Man. Noah frowned, then remembered. The Hedgehog Man was one of the mutants who'd awakened his power and had been killed by Noah, his soul absorbed. He would have forgotten him entirely, if not for the faintly self-satisfied face printed on the page. Why did this image appear? Did the Book of Murder imprint absorbed souls on its pages? A flash of light crossed the book, and information poured into Noah's mind. He listened and understood. The Book of Murder, Mei's Soul Stealer, did more than strengthen itself by absorbing soul power. It could imprison and enslave souls that possessed extraordinary power, absorbing their essence to bolster the book while binding them to serve its owner. Those imprinted on its pages were not ordinary souls, but beings with notable power, like the Hedgehog Man. Common souls had no such imprint because they carried no power useful to the book. If Noah wished, however, he could forcibly place ordinary souls onto its pages as well. Noah briefly wondered about the mechanics. If mutant abilities were tied to an X gene in the body, how could a soul retain such power? Did souls have genes? Soul blood? Soul cells? He shrugged it off. It was a question for later research. He raised one hand and willed the book. A thread of spirit uncoiled, and a translucent figure stepped from the pages and materialized on the ground. Noah pointed. Go, Hedgehog Man. Use Death's Embrace on the Teemo dummy. Chapter 479, Short-Lived Existence. Go, Hedgehog Man! Noah barked. He called the Hedgehog Man's soul and jabbed a finger, ordering the translucent spirit to attack the training dummy. The ghostly figure snapped into a snarl, spread his arms, and sharp quills sprouted over his body, even his cheeks, as he charged the dummy headlong. He ran with legs that kicked against the ground rather than floating, his face set in a wild grimace. These weren't the same black quills he had in life. The soul quills looked less intimidating, but they carried far greater force. Empowered by the Book of Murder, the soul-stealing scroll, this soul form of the Hedgehog Man was much stronger than the weak living version he'd once been. Though transparent, his soul could physically interact with reality, and he attacked as if made of flesh and bone. Noah, however, quickly bypassed him. Before the Hedgehog Man reached the dummy, Noah waved a hand and fired a thread of magic that slipped past the spirit and sank into the target. The spell was meant to boost the dummy's defenses. In the game, League of Legends, you could click a panel to buff a practice dummy's health and armor. In reality, Noah had to inject magic to produce the same effect. He dialed the enhancement up to roughly the strength of steel. The wooden effigy now looked unchanged to the eye, but underneath its grain, the dummy had become as tough as a man coated in steel. The Soul Hedgehog Man slammed into it anyway. That's how he fought. Close quarters, wrapping his body around a foe and battering with quills. He couldn't shoot them, and his mutant gene didn't grant great strength, so he relied on brutal contact. In original X-Men lore, his most notorious act had been killing an ordinary woman by embracing her. Now, even in soul form, he pressed that same savage technique with renewed ferocity. On contact with the steel-plated dummy, the quills popped through with a wet, tearing sound and embedded themselves. Holes riddled the effigy's surface in an instant. The Hedgehog Man retracted his quills so he wouldn't be pinned, then splayed them out and rammed himself into the dummy again and again. Under the command of the Book of Murder, he fought relentlessly, improvising with the few methods he had. To Noah, he still looked ridiculous, just an ordinary guy covered in spikes. Tsk. Noah watched with a disdainful chuckle. Even after the book strengthened him, this one was useless. He didn't need the soul. The Book of Murder pulsed as if in response, and a message flickered through Noah's mind. Can unwanted souls be destroyed? Noah turned back to the book and looked at the Hedgehog Man's illustration on its first page. He didn't like the soul occupying such a prominent spot. If you get top billing, at least be impressive. This one made him queasy. Without hesitation, he extended a finger and pressed it to the page, magic coalescing at the tip like an eraser. As his fingertip moved, Noah began to wipe the Hedgehog Man's image away. The soul on the training field froze mid-strike the moment the ink of him started to fade. First the head dissolved, then the rest of the translucent body thinned and unspooled, until the figure collapsed into pure soul energy and flowed back into the book. The pages of the Book of Murder went blank. The erased soul, reduced to raw energy, was absorbed by the artifact. Like other artifacts with a will, akin to the World Ender's magic hat, the book did not protest. It simply took the energy and fed a portion of it back to Noah, bolstering his own soul strength. Clean slate, Noah said, snapping the book closed and patting the cover. A faint glow answered him from the binding, then faded. He tapped the cover again, half amused. You're no fun. So unlike Mau Mau, no personality at all. A total shut-in, are you? The book remained silent. Then Noah frowned as a small practical concern struck him. When it was the Dark Seal ring, it had been easy to carry, just slip it on his hand. Now it had become a book. Carrying a book was inconvenient. He couldn't exactly tuck it under his arm everywhere he went. Chapter 480, Welcome Dinner, with a treasure chest and a delivery? I need to figure out a plan first, Noah muttered, rubbing his chin as he stared at the soul-stealing scroll. He could have slotted it into his equipment to get its abilities without carrying it, But this scroll wasn't like regular gear. It was an artifact with a will of its own, and Noah didn't want it tucked away in a backpack or equipment slot. The magic hat he'd summoned earlier and the soul-stealing scroll were both conscious artifacts, and he treated them more like companions than tools. He kept the magic hat at home like a pet, rather than constantly equipping it, and he intended to do the same with the scroll, except it was something he needed to carry. He had to find a better solution. He considered his options for a moment, then smiled. Let's see if this works. Cradling the scroll, Noah raised his free hand and spread his palm. A purple magic circle unfurled, Lulu's whimsy, the Fey sorceress's signature magic. Purple motes of magic fell over the soul-stealing scroll and wrapped it up. As a sentient book, it could have resisted being altered, but because Noah was its master, it offered no opposition. Under the whimsy, the scroll began to shrink until it was no larger than Noah's thumb, transformed into an exquisite miniature book pendant. This makes things much more convenient, Noah said, turning the tiny scroll over in his hand. With it that size, he could make it a necklace, a bracelet charm, or a pendant on his waist. Book of Murder, how do you feel? Any discomfort? He asked. Buzz, came the quiet reply. You're not uncomfortable? Good. Why do I call you Book of Murder? Habit, I suppose. Consider it your other name. The scroll communicated with Noah through soul magic, transmitting thoughts directly into his mind. Since it felt fine, Noah left it small. Because the scroll didn't resist the whimsy, he didn't have to pour much power into keeping it that way. The effect could be maintained with almost no effort. He wasn't done. Noah released a stream of white magic from his fingertips. A white mist surrounded the tiny scroll and condensed into a delicate, ice-forged bracelet. The bracelet and the miniature scroll did not touch directly. They were linked by a fine, thread-like strand of white magic. Done, Noah said, pleased, and slid the bracelet onto his wrist. The ice-forged bracelet was formed from frost magic, though not as hard as true ice. Under Noah's power, it would never melt. He held up his arm and addressed Lysandra. Lysandra, we've got another little one in the house, like Mau Mau, except this one's personality is quieter. Should we have a welcome dinner tonight? Lysandra smiled and nodded. A banquet sounds perfect. No banquet for Mau Mau when he arrived, did we? Noah mused. Let's make up for Mau Mau's as well, though I wonder if the soul-stealing scroll can eat. Wait, one more thing, he added. He hadn't forgotten the last unopened bonus chest from his 10-pull summon. After handling the artifacts, he tapped the final treasure chest open. It shook, flung back its lid, and spilled a brilliant light. 2 orbs rose out and floated before him, one white, one red. The white orb was obvious, essence. He clicked it first, obtained 2,000 essence. Treasure chests are the best for refilling essence, Noah thought. He loved the summoning chests. They kept granting thousands of essence each time, saving him days of questing. The red orb had seemed unremarkable at first, but when he glanced back, it was different. Its surface, once a soft glow, now threw off streaks of crimson lightning that crackled and danced around it. Noah felt the power radiating from it immediately. This is. He reached out to tap it, but the lightning spit fire across his skin as his hand approached. The red energy was intense, enough to have injured him before he absorbed the stone man's power. Now it couldn't even make a mark on him, but the force was undeniable. When his finger finally touched the orb, the red light dispersed, unveiling the item wrapped inside. Noah's eyes widened. Runes?